Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest issue of Comic Book Gentlemen, the podcast where we use our decades of being giant nerds to discuss the most divisive issues in the fandom. I'm your host, Greg, joined by my constant co-host, Dave. Dave, how's it going?
It's going well.
It's going well. It's good to hear.
Considering it's like, we're on the march to Christmas.
Yep.
Normally this is a super stressful time. All my shopping done.
Wow, really?
All of it.
That's impressive.
Have been done for a week.
Dude, I tried to get it all done. I was having no luck, but I'm glad to
first
hear.
Christmas, I was just like, this is actually quite an enjoyable time.
Well, let's hopefully it's going to get a little bit more enjoyable because as obviously it's our final episode of the year, and our tradition for if you're a new listener is we always talk about our favorite comics that we read in 2024. Not necessarily that they came out in 2024, but that we read this year.
Yep.
This is our super fun, happy episode where we just like, hey, here's some fun comics to go check out. So I'm super excited. Always my favorite episode. But before we get into the list, Dave, how was comics for you in 2024? Did you have some like bangers, or were they kind of all mid, or what are you feeling? Oh, really? So much for being positive.
Yeah. They were just a lot of. I think it was a combination of like things coming into the new year. Some things were ending, and then some good things started. And it's like some of the things that started really only just started recently. So you haven't had enough of a track record to kind of say, yeah, this was really good or not. And unfortunately, like some of the stuff that ended, like the reason why stuff ends often is because it's not doing so well, at least in sales. So it was just kind of a weird year, and for me it was like I started actually going back into stuff that was published, 2-3 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like,
no.
I mean, there's so many comics every year that it's like you're gonna miss something. It's like TV shows, video games. There's always a couple you're gonna slip through the cracks. You gotta go back for. For me, I thought I had I read a lot of good comics. I think the biggest issue for me was I didn't have one that like stood out as my number one.
No.
Like in years past when we've done this, Immortal Hulk was one of them. Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky was one of them. But I didn't have that for me this year of like, oh, this one's my number one. Can't wait. They were all just like pretty good, and we'll definitely get into that as to why. But no, I thought it was a pretty good year for comics, at least from what I read. Again, it's funny you mentioned the fact that maybe not comics this year. Everything on my list I'm looking at right now did not come out in 2024, so it's very funny that you mentioned that.
I mean, some of it that I read came out way before that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was a really like for stuff that came out in 2024 within the the mainstream of say Marvel, DC. It was just like there was some stuff that was okay.
Yeah.
That was maybe a little more than okay, but there was it was just a really middling year.
I see, but I think like you also mentioned though, there's some that were pretty new that just we haven't read enough to determine it's a really good one. Like I mean, again, some positive stuff is Ultimate Spider-Man is starting off pretty strong. We'll see where it's going. I'm really enjoying From the Ashes so far, and X-Men. We'll see where it's going, but again, only been a couple issues out, so how are you going to judge it? But we're here today to be pretty positive. We're going to talk about our 5 favorite comics that we read this year.
We're going to be pretty positive until one of us mentions something that the other one disliked.
Hey, come on, no worries. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, would you want to go first? Want me to go first?
Sure.
What are you feeling?
I'll go first.
Yeah, go first. So what's one of your top 5?
I will quickly rank this in my head.
Okay.
I would say the first one that I wanted to bring up was actually one that you lent me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Which was Transformers Volume 1.
Yeah.
Robots in Disguise by Daniel Warren Johnson and Mike Spicer.
Yeah.
It was like nostalgic but refreshing, yet adult themed. And I have to say it, my favorite Transformer of all time, ever since I was a little kid, was Starscream.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was always Starscream. Just because he was a little bitch.
Yeah.
And he just got slapped around a lot in Megatron. And the great thing is, like, Megatron's not in the first first volume, so it's like he's the boss.
Yeah.
And he's just horrible at it. But it was just like some of the art, some of the action sequences that happened were just harkened back to my younger self, and I was just screaming like, "Oh, that was awesome!"
Yeah.
Like when Optimus first comes in and launches himself in truck form right into one of the Decepticons. I can't remember who it was, but it was just it was just really well done. The art was decent, the writing was decent for what it is. It's essentially it's a kid's toy, kids cartoon from the 80s. So it was nostalgic. Art was good. I liked the writing. I liked the changes that they made, but still held true to the kind of the concept of what it was. Very much enjoyed it.
You know what's really funny is this almost made my list. It just got edged out by a couple different things, but yeah, I thought it was a really solid. The universe that they're introducing is really cool. I think for me, like the biggest issue I have for it again is the same issue most people have with the movies. It was just like a little too many humans for me. Yeah. Like I'd be okay with an entire comic that was just robots. That's all I need, and I have it. And like you said, the robot on robot action in here was amazing, and like the robot on robot conflicts in here were so good, and like, that's what I want.
At one point they like back-to-back suplexed.
Yeah, it was so good.
It was like, oh my god, you even threw some like WWE wrestling into
At
this.
one point, Optimus Prime rips off his own arm and beats a motherfucker with it. Yeah, it was so good.
Yeah, it was so good.
Yeah. I'm super excited to see where it goes. How are you? What's your opinion on the fact that it's mixed with G.I. Joe? Are you excited about that?
I mean, I'm excited about it because I think they call that Energon.
Yeah, Energon Universe.
I'm excited for that because also being a G.I. Joe fan, I've been hunting for a while to see if I could find myself the complete set of the original Marvel G.I. Joe series.
Yeah.
Because me and a buddy used to collect it and talk about it all the time. But mixed in with the Transformers, I mean, I read the old crossover that they did. I mean, what can G.I. Joe really do against like giant
That's
robots?
My question.
That's my question. Often it didn't go over too well in the first series,
mm-hmm.
but I like G.I. Joe too. Mm-hmm. I mean, like if you would have said, "Oh, we're gonna mix it with Voltron or something," I didn't know, I've been like, I don't know about that. But they've done it before. It's worked. They were around at the same time. Mm-hmm. One of the voice actors who did Starscream also did Cobra Commander.
Oh yeah.
So
they got the crossover built in.
Yeah, they got the crossover built in.
No, I'm super excited to keep working on this. Like I said, I'm very curious to see how they combine G.I. Joe with Transformers because like obviously the initial thought process is G.I. Joe is with the Autobots and then Cobra Command is with Decepticons, but like why would Megatron and Starscream give a shit about Cobra Commander? That's the real question for me is like how are they gonna bridge that gap? So I'm curious to see how it goes.
It'll be curious.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a really good pick. Like I said, almost made my list, so I can't disagree with you yet. My number 5, and it's crazy. I only found out this existed last week. I immediately read it and was like, wow, this is actually really good. How have I never heard about this? And I'm sure you've heard about this, but I can't believe we've never talked about this. It was Spider-Man Life Story by Chip Zdarsky and Mark Bagley. Mm-hmm. So have you heard about this?
Yes.
Okay, I had no idea this existed, and apparently it came out in 2019. So for the last 5 years, over my head type of thing. So I only found out about it because Comic Tropes did a video on it. Again, shout out to Comic Tropes. Love all the stuff he does. Mm-hmm. If you haven't heard about it, if you haven't read it, basically what it is that Chip Zdarsky and Mark Bagley go through each decade of Spider-Man since the 60s. And they basically just have Peter Parker age naturally. So the issue with a lot of syndicated comic books is like you don't age, you just have the same character who's been 20 or 30 for the last 60 years. So it comes down to like how is this character supposed to grow, and that's a lot of issue a lot of people have with those type of comic books, which I agree. But obviously as comic book fans we're used to it at a certain point. So I thought it was a really interesting retelling of some of Spider-Man's like most iconic storylines. Like each decade what they did is select the biggest storylines and tweak them a little bit. And then you had Mark Bagley art, which is my favorite Spider-Man art because of obviously Ultimate Spider-Man is the reason why. And I love Chip Zdarsky's writing, so it's like it was a perfect combination for me. My biggest issues with it is because it was Spider-Man's biggest storylines, they're the most traumatic stuff that happens to Peter Parker right after each other. So you constantly get Peter Parker just getting the shit kicked out of him, and he's such an asshole because obviously he's going through the worst parts of his life back to back to back. Like when you have those syndicated comics, you have a couple issues that are a little bit lighter in between Kraven's Last Hunt and Clone Saga, right? But it went straight from Kraven's Last Hunt to Clone Saga, and like his life is just miserable. So it's just one of those things of like Peter Parker can kind of come off as an asshole a lot of the times, which is a little bit like hard to read sometimes. But really for me, I was like, wow, this was really cool seeing the history, and it's cool because it does branch out to other Marvel superheroes like Iron Man, Captain America have this civil war going on behind them type of thing. So I was just blown away that I had never heard about this. So what were your thoughts on that?
Chip Zdarsky did a run on, I want to say it was Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man, I think. I want to say it only made it to about 17 issues or something like that. It's where he introduced the fact that Peter Parker had a sister.
Okay.
And a bunch of stuff. And I think that's the one thing about Chip that I'm perfectly okay if you just give him like, hey, 10 issues, here you go, run with it. With certain characters and just do with it as you wish, like an alternate universe kind of thing. But when he's like writing within the main storyline, it's like he doesn't always stay with the script of the character in the sense of like, you just introduced a sister that he never had, that's also a secret agent, and like it just like where they eventually kind of flattened it out and kind of made it make sense, where it was just like, no, it's not actually a sister, it's she's brainwashed to think of blah blah blah. It was just very odd. So I've got it. Okay. I've got the one that you mentioned, but I haven't read it just because the Chip Zdarsky series
tainted you?
Just kind of tainted me a little. Okay. And it's one of those ones I bought and I put it up kind of like Care Andrews' Reign, because it's again, that's another one that I've heard people say amazing, and then other people go absolutely hate it, it's awful. So it's like, yeah, I'll just put that in my box.
Well, I highly recommend you read it, because I'm especially as a huge Spider-Man fan.
I like Bagley.
Oh yeah, and I love Bagley. Well, and like also the covers for these, I would have those on my wall. Like I don't think Bagley did the covers, but I don't know who. But the way they designed them was so good. It kind of reminded me of Last Halloween, the way they designed the covers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But like again, it just like again blew my mind that I've never heard about this. And again, we've talked about this before. The one thing that DC seems to do better than Marvel is those one-off mini series that alter things a little bit, and I think this was a prime example of how Marvel could do that. Of like, hey, here's a Spider-Man. He goes from being 20 to 60, or what's the 80? By the end of the last book, type of thing. What would actually his life be like if he aged and had kids and got married and all that stuff, right? So it was really good. So I highly recommend checking it out.
Cool.
Yeah. So what's your next one, Dave?
Next one I would have would be. I love this. I'm going to do a little bit of a role reversal for myself, because normally I hate these people that come into my realm of like Spider-Man and talk about like, oh, I loved this run, and then I can pick all the holes in it and I don't like it. But it was Batman Failsafe.
Really?
And again, Chip Zdarsky, but he's writing a comic that I don't read on the usual. So I imagine there's like people out there, and there are, because I've read some comments. I just thought from the setup issue, which was like fairly just mundane Batman solving crime, Penguin dies, blames Batman, he's the bad guy, and then all of a sudden Failsafe shows up and starts kicking the shit out of him and the rest of the Bat family, and then they're like, okay, we can't handle them, so they call in reinforcements, and the reinforcements, such as Superman and whatnot, are getting their asses handed to them by this thing, and then you find out that Failsafe is a robot that essentially he built under another that Batman built under another persona to take care of him if he went off.
That's sick.
Off the rails. So it's just like 6-7 issues of just him trying, because it thinks like him, so everything he thinks, it keeps defeating him because it's thought of it before he did. And it's just over and over again, and he just gets the crap kicked out of him so bad. Everybody does. Yeah. And then it just ends on this, and again, it's got me so much that I'm like, man, I gotta read the next 6 issues or something, because what the hell? Just where it ends is just such a cliffhanger. And I went in and I read, and of course there was a whole bunch of people that dumped all over it because they're regular Batman fans, and I get it. I completely get it. But for me, it was just like a non-stop go action issue after issue after issue of just, whether it was the Justice League, the Bat family, just getting the crap kicked out of them by this thing, and it was great.
That's awesome.
I loved it.
Yeah. Is this the first time you've had a DC book on your top of the year?
Might have been.
It might. We'll have to go back in time and check. That's crazy.
I might have had Batman Deadly Foes on the last.
Did you? I don't remember that, but it was a couple of years ago, anyways. Yeah. But that's interesting. I'm glad that you're branching out to like non-Marvel stuff and checking it out.
I don't know. I have an affinity for people getting the crap kicked out of them. Like, especially, like, heroes that are, like, overdone. Like, you always hear about Batman, like, oh, Batman can beat anybody because he can outthink them. And it's like, oh, now there's this thing that he built to outthink himself.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
No, I've heard nothing but good things about Chip, Failsafe at least, right?
Yeah.
So I
really enjoyed it.
And like I said, I just had a Chip Zdarsky book on my list, right? So I'm a big fan of his. So I definitely want to check that out, and I'm glad it has good reviews. So, but yeah, no, I think his whole run sounds really cool. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, no, I mean, there's a Batman book on your list. This is crazy. Mm-hmm. So my next one. So speaking of going back in time, so obviously one of the big movies this year was Deadpool Wolverine, and one of the trailers that got me super hyped for that movie was when they revealed that the return of Daphne Keane as X-23 and an older X-23, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I love X-23 / Wolverine. She's awesome. And I was like, wait, I've never actually gone back and read her first main run as Wolverine. And that would be 2015's All New Wolverine by Tom Taylor, and then he had a bunch of different artists and all that stuff. So I was like, you know what? I've never actually read this. I'm going to go back in time and go back to this. So this is all the way back in 2015, which is almost 10 years ago, which is crazy. But no, I was super impressed by it. I think it takes a character as X-23 that was always just that teen character that was angsty and like, was always a member of groups and was just the mad one that stabbed people, and really fleshed out her character and gave her her own, storylines, and gave her her own reason for being Wolverine, and really asked, like, what does it mean to be a Wolverine, and what does it mean for Laura Kinney to be a Wolverine, right? Yeah. And I thought it was a really great delving into the character, some really good story arcs. I love the fact that it got a full story, like he was able to start and complete the entire run. Where he ends it up, he even does a time jump and goes like, okay, where are we all in like 10 years? If I had to pick one arc that I like, that I think is the best out of the whole series, it would definitely be the first arc where you find out she has clone sisters of her. Clones of her, which is very interesting because obviously that's X-23's whole thing, and she's a clone of Wolverine, right? So my only critique of it is it's really funny how some comic book writers always have to have characters who are funny. But in my mind, it's always like, yeah, I understand, like, you want to have that funny character because it's always nice to have that comic relief. But how do they become funny? So, for example, her youngest sister, Gabby, is just hilarious. And she's a great character, and I love her. Like, Honey Badger is her codename. I love her. But she was literally bred to be a weapon in a torture facility for years, and watched her sisters all die. Why does she have humor? That was my only issue with it. Maybe she snapped, like Deadpool or something like that. But that was my biggest issue, was just like, I love her. She's great. I don't want her to change, but why is she like that? Like, what was there somebody who intervened and added that humor to her? That's the dumb, super smart, not super smart, but like brainy questions that you're like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you ignore that, it's a really good series, really delves into the character and establishes Laura Kinney, and she's been Wolverine ever since, type of thing. So I really recommend it. Did you end up reading that series? Or?
No, I haven't read, like, outside of when she first showed up, I think it was in Uncanny X-Men, way back when.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, the comics she's been in since, whether it was, she was in the all-new X-Men for a while with the team of X-Men from the past, and then she was in, of course, starting relationships with the odd situations with like Scott Summers.
Oh,
and
what?
Like younger
I didn't know.
Scott Summers.
Youngest Scott Summers. I thought you meant old Scott Summers.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, it was just like it was. She was always an interesting character for me because I typically don't like when they go like, "Hey, we have a Wonder Woman, so let's make a Wonder Man." Let's have a Batman, so we have a Batwoman. Like I don't like unless there's a good story there to explain like why you're doing that. And in this case, I thought like with the clones and how they set it up, and there was a lot of backstory that was put into that. And then they continued with her continuing to explore and find out that stuff has been really good. And I really enjoyed when her and I can't remember his name went into the vault.
Sync.
Sync. Yep. Yeah, and I thought that was pretty cool. And then, she's gone, so they use the resurrection protocol. She comes back, she doesn't remember any of the relationship basically they had, which I thought was just like heartbreaking and great at the same time. Like, it was really well done.
And it's funny that you bring it up because it really brings up one of the key things about Krakoa era, which is like the whole resurrection protocol, and like there's so much more they could have done with that. Okay, before I yell about Krakoa again, move on. But no, I highly recommend it. It was a good read. Yeah. Let's not do that. Yeah. Okay. What's your number 3?
My number 3 would be one that I know you're going to contest. This is my one you're going to contest. Immortal Thor.
Give me the sell.
So
give me the
sell. Reason why I like Immortal Thor is I like Al Ewing's writing. He's just good. What I like about the Thor one, the same thing that he did with the Hulk, is he has a tendency to go back, and I mean really far back. Like you can tell when they flash up the art, and you go, "Oh, when was that from?" Like so far back, and dig up old ideas and bring them forward. And that's what I liked about the Elder Gods. Was an idea that spawned, like, I want to say it was probably as far back as like Journeys into Mystery.
Wow.
Like it's old. Some of the art that I saw for it definitely looked old. So I like when they bring those ideas forward, and then kind of either expand on them or kind of twist them around. So I really enjoyed that, and especially with Thor, because I found like it was getting to the point where it's like, yeah, Thor, he's already pretty powerful. Oh, now he's got the Odin Force with him.
Yep.
So he's just super powerful.
Yep.
And like in the first issue, he's fighting basically the elder version of him, and he blasts it with everything he has, and it just stands there. Like, what are you doing? Like, he didn't do anything to it. So I just really enjoyed that, and then especially with that arc culminating with all of the people that have carried the hammer at some point or another, and the fact that they all can't carry the hammer and they have to keep passing it around.
Yeah, that was cool.
So I thought it was just really well. I thought it was a great start. It's since then it's had some ups and downs as it's kind of flowed out of that. One of the ups that I absolutely adored, because it was just like them making fun of themselves, was the Roxxon Thor issue, where they they printed a whole separate issue to the Thor run just for this Thor who was just completely marketed. He had his Thor tank and his like it was just them making fun of themselves, because chances are in the past Spider-Man's had a Doom buggy.
Yep.
You know, like they've had these stupid marketable things, and I just thought it was so great that they were just making so much fun of themselves, because it was an absolutely ridiculous issue. Like, it just made no sense. It was just but it was so funny. Because I remember some of this stuff going on in some of these comics where that was a legit thing. Like Spider-Man driving around in a Doom buggy.
Just to make that
they
toy.
can go up walls and crap.
Well, you had like Silver Spider-Man, all that stuff.
And I think Martin Coccolo's art was great. The new artist that's now taken over for him is pretty much in the same standard. But again, it's like, I really liked the start. There was a lot of mystery. I dug into the old history of these elder gods and stuff, and I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Where are we going to go? And it did waver a little bit after that, but I did like the first short run that they did.
I agree with you. I think the Roxxon storyline and the when you pass the hammer around a bunch of people were highlights, because I am still reading the series, which is interesting because I don't like it. But like, because I agree those were highlights, and I'm like, okay, I love these highlights. I'm so surprised you like it, because you and I talk all the time about sometimes there's some writers that are just so wordy. And I find this, and I love Al Ewing. There's so many of his stuff I love. But like when he starts talking about Norse mythology, and like,
give me some more.
Oh no, dude! They just kept going on and on. And I was like, "Shut up, dude! Go fight!" Like, what are you talking about? Like, there's the arc I just read recently where it was him and Hercules hanging out.
Yeah.
And like you had this potential, he was gonna fight Nyx and he was gonna fight Zeus, but then they just talked their way out of it. And I was like, "What? What is this? Like, nothing happened. Like, what do you mean?"
I like it. I like the dialogue. It's actually one of the few Marvel comics right now that when I get my batch of comics every month, that's one of the ones I look forward to reading.
Really?
Every month. Yeah.
And
you know, I was not anywhere near a Thor fan.
Yep.
In my early days of comic book reading. I can't explain it. I like what he's doing with
I guess my other question for you is, did you read the arc before Immortal Thor? I can't remember. It was either Al Ewing or Donny Cates. I can't remember who it was, but it was when he like fights Galactus and becomes a Herald of Galactus for like one issue.
Yeah, that was Cates.
Okay, so I think that's my other issue too, is like, because I read those back to back, I feel like maybe they blended together, and I was so meh on the Cates run that's kind of, for me, blended into the Al Ewing run. I'm
it was the Cates run on that, and the Cates run on Hulk.
Yeah,
was just like, I don't know if he was just burnt out or what was going on, because both of them kind of like had some initial great starts and then they just faltered.
So yeah, I do disagree. I don't think it's that good. But again, I agree. Like, I think the Roxxon, everything they've done with Roxxon recently, and it's funny because I think Al Ewing introduced the Minotaur during Immortal Hulk. I'm pretty sure because that was when he did that weird Yeti alien thing, and like they were selling that, and I think that whole storyline with Roxxon is really cool because they have the whole obviously commentary on massive corporations trying to take over superheroes, right?
I just like especially recently in the series, like he has a tendency to do this because he did it in the Immortal Hulk as well. Was he'll go back and he'll find villains that you just really haven't seen around in a while. Like most recently, he's brought in like Radioactive Man, Gargoyle, Cobra, Mr. Hyde. It's like all these guys that it was like, oh, I haven't seen these guys really prominently since like the late '80s, early '90s. Yeah. And he brings back and he makes it cool, and I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, I love Al Ewing. For me, Immortal Thor is just a little too wordy, which is hilarious to say. So
right. So let's go read some Bendis comics.
Yeah. But his wordy is better wordy in my opinion.
Let's go read some Chris Claremont.
No. Listen, okay, Chris Claremont. Yeah, he's terrible. Like Chris Claremont to me is like reading the dialogue twice. Bendis to me is like reading good dialogue.
It does feel like with Chris Claremont, he's like he'll write something. Yes. He'll be like this, and he'll be like, and then it's like right at the end, he was like, I don't know if they'll understand this, so I better explain it a different way.
See, yeah, and then Bendis to me is like reading good dialogue, characters talking a lot. But then this version of Al Ewing feels like he's just writing an essay dissertation. I was like, bro, I don't care.
I disagree. I love it.
Okay, so let's move on. My number 3, again, is one comic book that I've heard about forever. It's been out, I think it started in 2012 or 2013, and I always saw it on the comic book shelves and just never got around to reading it. But it was Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. I finally got around to it. I have a new coworker at work, and he's like, hey, you like comic books? I've been giving him a bunch of Marvel recommendations. And he's like, hey, I have all of Saga. And I'm like, please let me read this. I've been meaning to read it for so long. Yeah. And so I had, like, the only thing I knew about Saga was the cover you always see where it's, like, the two main characters and then they're a baby. And you're like, what is this about? You know, like, type of thing going on. And so, so I read all from volume 1 all the way to volume 11. So that's probably, like, 10 years worth of a comic right there type of thing. And, man, it's wild. I personally have really been gravitating more towards projects where it has a definitive end eventually. Like, obviously Sega still has a long way to go, but I find having these comics where you have a writer able to tell a full story, map out everything they're doing, and really flesh out every single character. Because again, the issue with syndicated comics like Marvel and DC is you never know when you're going to get canceled. You never know, and you can have an amazing run, and then it completely gets wiped out by the next guy, type of thing. So having these storylines where it's like this guy and these people are going to be in charge of it from start to end, you just get so much more depth. And the thing that really sets Sega apart, in my opinion, to other comic books that I've read is just that, like, every single character is one of the most fleshed out characters I've ever read. Like, every character has an insane backstory that can, like, when they'll do something crazy, like, you'll meet them for the first time, they'll do something crazy and you're like, why the fuck are they doing this? But then they explain their backstory, like, oh man, they had the most tragic backstory I've ever written. And it's like, that makes complete sense. And then the next character, even more tragic backstory. You're like, what is happening?
If I was equate it to anything else, it would be like every Dungeons and Dragons character I've ever seen somebody put together.
Maybe.
My parents are dead.
Yes.
My family's dead.
Yes.
It's just horrible.
But the way the way that makes it beautiful is the fact that, like, you'll have a character introduced into this random issue, like, gets killed off, like he's a random henchman that gets killed off in issue 3, and then issue 500 the guy's girlfriend is like, you killed my boyfriend, fuck you, and like turns into this whole storyline about like, oh yeah, I guess I did kill her boyfriend, my bad. And there's like everything's connected, and like they've obviously thought about this so just thoroughly, and like it's all connected. I can't wait to see where it goes. And then like the things they do in it is just crazy. Like I was telling you this the other day, there's a storyline where they're flying through space and then they randomly get like stuck on like a planet or something like that. So what's going on? Suddenly the planet's like exploding, and the thing that comes out of the planet is like a black hole baby. And the black hole baby is just like, everybody's like, what the fuck? And like, we gotta get out of here. And like there's so many crazy things that happen. You're just like, wow, this is insane. I think my two biggest issues with it, and one of them is just a personal preference, it's very sexual. Like I this is a reason I don't watch Game of Thrones, and like I've read Game of Thrones, and that was my biggest issue with Game of Thrones was how sexual it is. Sega is very sexual, and again, that's just a personal preference, and there's some people who don't care about that, and they're gonna have a great time with it. But that's just a personal preference. So heads up on that if you want to read Sega, that's you just have to be aware of that. And then 2, man, is it depressing? Like, like every issue is tragic, and like there's something sad's happening, and like it was, and again, I read it all in like a span of like a week, so like having all of that depressing stuff in a week was kind of hard to read, but it was really good. But it was like, man, like you're like, come on guys, I believe in you, you can do it, and then they're all dead, and it's like, oh my gosh. There was my favorite volume, I think it was like volume 9 or 10, so it was near the end, but like it was like the happiest volume where they were all finally together, and like they were all kind of just vibing and trying to talk about like, okay, what's your plan for the future? What's your plan for the future? We'll try to make it happen. Then just almost all of them get killed. And it's like, oh my gosh. Like, didn't see that coming at all. And then the last thing I'll say...
sounds like Game of Thrones.
Oh, exactly, right? Like, I can't believe this is not an HBO series yet. Like every single... people with money should be trying to buy this comic. Like, it's insane. The last thing I'll mention...
There's a lot like that.
There's a lot like that, true.
This sounds really something that would be right up their alley.
Yeah. And one last thing I'll say before you can respond is there's a character named Goose. It's spelled Ghus. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I call him Goose. But he looks like a baby seal, you know those like baby seal, like white fluffy. Yeah. He's the cutest motherfucker I've ever seen in my life. He's a killer, man. He's like, it's so funny because like they introduced him randomly, and you could tell it was just like supposed to be like a one-off thing, but you could tell everybody loved him, so they're like, bring that motherfucker back. And then they start like again slowly explaining his backstory, and at one point one of the characters is like, holy shit, that's Goose the Blood Lord, and I was like. What? I'm like, what? It was like, what the fuck are you talking about? But he's the greatest character I've ever seen in my life. I love Goose. So what are your thoughts and questions on Sega? So
I'm interested because it sounds almost like what Guardians of the Galaxy should have been.
Yeah.
Like sort of, I guess. I see some parallels with this Goose character and Rocket.
Yeah.
You know.
This is Goose.
Yeah. I just I'm curious to see. Like I'm not. The realm of outside of the mainstream kind of Marvel DC, like there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of things that I always hear about. This is one of them that I have heard of, and mostly because of the writer. The writer actually spent some time on, I want to say he spent some time on Ultimate X-Men.
Yeah, he did.
And it was okay, but he also did some other stuff that was I liked a lot better. But it sounds like something I'd be interested in reading just for the writing even.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. What I found out, so originally, again, it was Brian K. Vaughan, which, again, is a pretty prolific writer at this point. He did Y the Last Man. Yeah. He did Paper Girls, a bunch. He actually started The Runaways, which, again, is one of my personal favorites. But the artist is Fiona Staples. I don't know if you've heard of her.
No.
She's actually Canadian. She's from Calgary, which I was blown away by. But apparently she's lauded as one of the best comic book artists out there. And when you read Sega and some of the splash pages she does, and again, when you see the Black Hole Baby, and like there's, again, just all the character creation she does. And apparently what happened was, Brian K. Vaughan got it started, but it's really now Fiona Staples' book. And Brian K. Vaughan is just kind of helping with, like, again, mapping things, but really Fiona Staples is like the lead on it. Like I gave you volume 1 for Christmas, and it's funny because when I read volume 1, it was the old version and it said Brian K. Vaughan first and then Fiona Staples, but if you look at the book I gave you, it now says Fiona Staples first and then Brian K. Vaughan, which is really interesting. So but again, writing's really good, like really good writing, really good art.
It's awesome. Interesting because I was paying attention to that regarding like some of the comics and stuff that I was looking at and who wrote it and whatnot, and I'm now seeing, like, it's so funny because at one point, like if you go back to say the 90s, it was the artist that was on first.
Oh, right? Really?
Then the writer. I didn't care about any writers. I didn't even know who the writers were.
That's funny.
Like, for the most part, it was like the only writer I knew in Spider-Man that had written a Spider-Man was McFarlane. Because they gave him his own Spider-Man comic. Yeah. Like, the writers were just off the radar. Like,
really?
We just didn't pay attention to who they were writing unless you absolutely knew who they were, like Chris Claremont.
Claremont, yeah.
You just didn't pay attention, and now it's gotten to the point now where I see that reversed on so many comics now. It's like the writer, then the artist.
Yep.
And some of the artists I would say equate to being like really good artists that would have been very popular back in the 90s or the 80s, but they're second on the comic, which is really quite interesting.
It is very interesting. No, and like
because it's such a visual medium.
Yeah, exactly.
People would go like, "Oh, well, the art's got to be good," or "Why would you read a comic?" kind of thing. But now it's gotten to the point where there's many comics that I've read where I'm like, "This art is awful," but the writer is so damn good that I go through it and I enjoy it just as much.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying there, and I think we're kind of I definitely agree with that with the last like 10 years. I think that was a big thing. I think now recently you're starting to see like more even, in my opinion. So like because now you have like Chichetto is a really good one. Fiona Staples is really good, and like there are some artists that are now like, okay, I'll read anything they draw, type of thing. Which is hopefully there's more. In the end, you just want balance, right? Like you want a good writer, you want a good artist.
Yeah,
make it good.
I mean, at the end of the day, you always see the writer and the artist.
Yeah.
So they're always there. It's just a question of who's first.
Yeah. And again, the other issue too is sometimes they swap out artists like all the time, and you're like, come on, guys, just stick with one guy for a while. But yeah. So that's my rant on Sega. But yeah, let's go for your number 2.
Number 2 is now. It took me a while to get through this, and not because it was bad. I really quite enjoyed it. But for some reason, I just kind of got disconnected from it. Got reading some other stuff, doing some other things, and then I came back to it, and I was just like, "Wait a minute, what the hell is going on?" So I had to start it over again, and then read through it, and then I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute! Like, why was I not on this more?" Before, I guess it was just maybe the headspace. Or something.
Yeah.
But it was a graphic novel now, but it was a series called Justice. DC. By Jim Kruger and Alex Ross, and I didn't realize that Alex Ross. Now I understand that there was an artist on it, which I think was Braithwaite, did the art and then he painted over it. So it was kind of I don't know why that sat is interesting to me because I always thought of Alex Ross like he does his own thing. But what I liked about this was it was Justice League. It was very Golden Age Justice League.
Okay.
But you had all of the the main cast there: Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, the whole whole work, Superman, players. Batman, all of them. And basically, it starts off. It's like all of the supervillains are having a dream of the world ending, and the superheroes are failing to save it.
Okay.
So the villains band together and save the planet. And at the same time, get rid of the heroes.
Really?
Yeah. Because they're going to screw it up.
Yeah.
So we're going to just get them on the sidelines, and then we're going to, cure cancer and get people walking again, like do all these crazy things to save Earth. And it was like such an interesting premise, especially where it got to at the end in the sense of like, who was the mastermind behind the whole thing. It was really quite good. When I went back and started kind of read it again, I went, okay, wait a minute. I just wasn't paying attention. Obviously my headspace wasn't there. This is what's happening, and now, now we're moving on to this. And it was just like interesting things that they did with each of the Justice League to kind of get them out of the picture. I thought what they did to Green Lantern was just like, it was like it actually. I thought about it and I was just like, that sounds horrifying. Like it was just bad. But the art, like Alex Ross is great. The only thing I would knock on this was there were a couple panels, especially when all shit was breaking loose and you were in the last like 2 issues where there was just like heroes and villains and shit all over the place. It was like very busy, and his art was very, especially when you're going from panel to panel, it was very distorted, and you're trying to figure out like, okay, do I go from this panel to this panel or that? So it was a little broke down. I found it a little off there.
Okay.
But the story was great. Like it was like I said, it was more of a Golden Age story. Not this kind of like dark, morose crap that you that you see nowadays. It was just. It was. I want to call it like good old fashioned superhero comic. That's what it was, and I really highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. I still put Kingdom Come above it.
Okay,
but it was still good.
Dave,
really good.
2 DC books.
I know.
In your top 5.
Yes.
What?
I know.
Okay, so I've never heard of this. What year did it come out?
I'm not even sure what year it came out.
Okay,
You'd
that's
have to look it up. It's I know initially it was like just like Kingdom Come. It was a 12-issue series.
Okay.
And I just got for Christmas, it was actually a mistake. I thought it was Kingdom Come.
Oh.
And I showed it to my wife, and my wife was like, "Oh, okay," and she picked it up, and then I opened it up, and I was like, "What the hell is this Justice thing?"
Yeah.
You know, so I was like, "Okay, I guess I'll give this a try at some point." You know, it's Alex Ross. I like him. Really quite enjoyed it.
2005 apparently.
Yeah,
which
really
is wild. Wow, I
Yeah.
can't believe I've never heard of this. So yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out. That's really cool. And who is the author? Jim Kruger?
Kruger.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. No, I've never heard of that. Man, that concept is wild.
It was really it was different. Like it just like I'm not much of a Justice League person. You know, I there's particular heroes that I like within the DC genre. This was just like a really it was interesting to see how each of the heroes were dealing with each of the things. Like the two that stuck out to me were the worst were the Flash and Green Lantern.
Oh man, that's wild.
It's like, oh god, this just sounds horrible.
I gotta check that out.
Yeah.
What who were the villains? Was it like the big players?
Oh
like
yeah,
Lex
all
Luthor,
your big
Joker?
players. The great thing was like you would expect like certain people, like obviously Luthor, Mr. Freeze.
Yeah, I can see that.
Cheetah. You know, like all of the big stays for all of them. But then when you got to Batman, it was like, no. They were like, the villains that were banding together, they were like, we just can't trust the Joker. So we're just going to leave him in prison.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
But they had the Riddler. They had, Solomon Grundy.
Oh, wow.
It was a large, like, not just on the superhero side, like there was like the Justice League, but then there was like a ton of extra people that are, you know, probably have been, you know, in and out of the Justice League, and heroes that you just don't always get to, that I like me as a casual kind of person, I don't get to see like Red Tornado.
Oh yeah,
play a prominent role, or
nice,
you know, Martian Manhunter. You know, from the limited amount that I've read of the Justice League. So it was good. I really quite enjoyed it.
Man, I gotta check that out. It sounds really cool. It sounds a lot like Justice League Unlimited. Like, obviously not that specific storyline, but like you're saying, like the expanded universe and getting into that and stuff like that. No, I gotta check that out for sure. And like you said, Alex Ross art. Speaking of artists that just have like, you gotta check it out. Alex Ross is really so iconic. So you gotta check it out. So yeah, let's get into my number 2. Again, one of those series that I did actually start reading it a long time ago, and I just fell off. Like, it was one of those things of when I was younger, the only way I read comics was either through the library, and so they didn't have a lot of newer comics. It was mainly older comics, or I only had like an allowance of like $20. I could only buy like one graphic novel once in a while, you know, type of thing. So I was reading this one up to a certain point, and then it completely fell off, and then finally it renewed in my mind. I was like, oh man, I gotta finish this series, and that would be Invincible. Especially with the animated show coming out and being so good, I was like, oh man, I can't believe I haven't finished Invincible. And it's so funny because like we had a podcast a couple months ago where I was praising Invincible. I was so good, and then it was funny because I was like, wait, I never finished it. So I should probably, especially if I'm praising it so much, I should probably go back and finish it. So I read. So small spoiler, I'm just going to say the name of the arc. When I was younger, I read up to the Viltrumite War, and where it left off was insane. And I was like, okay, I got to pick this up. So where I restarted it was right after the Viltrumite War. So if you're an Invincible reader, you kind of know what I'm talking about. And then I read till the very end. And so, again, the reason, it's very similar to Saga in the sense of like, you know, Robert Kirkman. Is it Robert Kirkman or Ryan Kirkman? Yeah, Robert Kirkman. Robert Kirkman, and then Ryan Ottley was the main artist, and it kind of fluctuated from there. But like, again, it's the guy who had a plan from day one and just, you know, knew every single character where they were going. And obviously he probably, you know, fluctuated a little bit here and there, but like he just had a grand plan for what he was doing. And it was great to see from start to finish this grand plan. And again, similar to Saga, every character had their own arc and had their own backstory. And, you know, there's a couple that kind of got rushed more than others, and there's a couple characters that died, and it's like, oh man, I would have loved to learn more about them, type of thing. But I think when you specifically focus in on the character of Invincible, like, it was such a amazing story, and like everything he went through was so cool. Like, talk about getting the shit kicked out of you. The amount of times Invincible, for a guy named Invincible, he almost dies like every single comic book. It's crazy. And like they keep escalating the violence. Yeah. But like the crazy thing to me is that I read a lot of superhero deconstruction, so like Watchmen and a couple things like that. But I find Invincible is a lot about superhero reconstruction, about like what does it mean to be a superhero, especially when you have a superhero like Invincible who other than some random people in the universe could beat him, for the most part, he's pretty invincible, right? And he's basically like almost Superman level of power, right? And he also has his dad, Omni-Man, and stuff like that. So it's like one of those things of like, when you have people with this immense of power, like, what does that mean to be a superhero, and like, what does it mean to actually save the world? And it really comes down to like the core argument he comes with is like, they're not saving the world, they're just putting people in jail, and that doesn't solve anything. And so that's a really big discussion they have throughout the series is, you know, what does it actually mean to save the world? And it's funny because one of my favorite storylines that happens is I don't want to spoil it for you, but the arc, I guess what I would call it, would be the Robot War, which Robot, one of my favorite characters, but he does something in the book that like pisses Invincible off to no end. He's like, you betrayed my trust. I can't believe you did this. And Invincible was basically telling every character, we have to stop him. He's evil. And then every other character goes, is he though? Is he though? And like literally they have this whole discussion about like, I don't know if we should be stopping him. Like, I think he might be right. And so it's so bad that Invincible just has to leave the planet. He's like, I can't handle this because I in my heart, I know this is wrong, but every other person is okay with it. So I have to just leave the planet. And then other stuff happens and they have a bigger discussion about what it means to do that. And you know, even crazier stuff happens to that. So yeah, Invincible from start to finish is just absolutely insane. Highly recommend Viltrumite War arc. Highly recommend the Robot War arc. Highly recommend Dinosaurus arc, which is one of my favorites. My biggest takeaway from Invincible is just sometimes they'll be having these insane battles where both characters are bloodied, their jaws are broken in half, they're flying at Mach 10 speeds, but they're having deep philosophical conversation about right and wrong. And you're like, now? Like, you guys are literally you're literally like punching each other so hard your fist is punching out the other side and you're killing each other, but you're having these deep philosophical conversations. And they'll go from one panel where they're about to kill each other, and then the next panel is like, you know what, you're right, and then the fight is over.
Point.
Exactly. And sometimes it's like, that makes no fucking sense. You're like, you're telling me you just killed his entire family, but because he made a good solid argument, you're gonna be on his side. Like, that's a little like, okay, we're stretching it here, you know, type of thing. But no, I think overall it's a great series. And really cool.
I'm looking forward to it because I did like Kirkman's The Walking Dead.
Yep.
You know, and I like the fact that he ended it.
Yep.
You know, similar to this, it's like, you get to a certain point and you close it off. You don't hand it off to the next guy and the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. You know, because that can get a little muddy and a little ugly.
Yep.
But it's interesting you say that. Like, that's one of the, you know, the building up a hero and like what happens when you are one of these people that is so powerful. That's what I find so fascinating about The Boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is because of that. It's like, what if you gave these superheroes these superpowers to people that are A, corporate rejects, and B, just regular people, like without like that have just suddenly, you know, either grew up with the powers or, you know, just have powers. And what would they really do?
Yep.
If they're like, that's the funny thing about, you know, the Marvel, the DC, you know, a lot of these superhero universes. It's like, oh, I just happen to get powers and I'm just have a really good conscience. And this is just like, no, what if you were just like an average Joe?
Yeah.
And what would you do with that? And I find that always interesting. And that's what I always found interesting about Robert Kirkman's writing on The Walking Dead, was it was less about the zombies and more about the people that were surviving this apocalypse. Like, how horrible they were to each other, you know, knowing like the planet is full of these undead things that are just like mindless. They don't care who you are. They're gonna eat you and then they're gonna turn you into one, but you got time to go and pick fights with each other because you know, like, it's just it's so gritty and awful.
Yeah. And yeah, so I highly recommend checking out. It's really good.
We got the first omnibus. So.
Nice. I do recommend the anime series as well. So for the anime series, Kirkman is also in charge of it. So he's not like directly writing it, but he's like kind of giving them like pointers and stuff. But what's really cool is he's actually changing things. Like, he's rearranging where certain people pop in, and like he's like, there's one, especially in season 2, there's something that happens in the comic book that's kind of played off as a joke, but in the animated series it's played off way differently. Like, they completely like 180 it, and it gives it such different meaning to the character and stuff like that. So I do recommend, like, even if you are reading the comic, feel free to go watch the animated series, because they are different. Like, they have the same main plot points, but then the smaller stuff is different, and it's really good. Yeah, which season 3 is coming out in February, I think. So it's really good. But yeah, Dave, we're at your number 1.
Yeah.
And if it's a DC book,
It is not.
I'm gonna assume you're being body snatched.
It is not.
Okay, what was your best comic you read
This
year?
one it did for me, and it just cleared the threshold of how many issues would have to be out for me to say, okay, I can move this one. I could call this one and say yes, I'll throw this one this one into the hat. Was Ultimate Spider-Man.
Okay.
Hickman, Checchetto. Hickman's a great writer. I'm gonna say this. Hickman is a great storyboard builder. Mm-hmm. Not so great at writing sometimes. But as far as like the overarching span of what he's doing is always really top notch. I feel. Checchetto's art, amazing. This is I feel like as much as there's a lot of stuff changed in it, it's an ode to every single Spider-Man fan out there that is sick and tired of seeing this shit with Peter Parker and Mary Jane not getting hooked up. Like between One More Day and
Jackpot.
Like it is awful. It is they've just what really upset me was they had Nick Spencer come in, and he basically fixed all of the ruined shit that they've done to Spider-Man in the last 20 years.
Yep.
And put it back on track and finished it off with Peter Parker and Mary Jane on a collision course to finally getting together and maybe moving on with their life. And then enter Zeb Wells and just destroyed it. And this is like an ode to like, well, what if that didn't happen? What if they're together? Mm-hmm. Here are their kids. And it's a different... It's like it's kind of like reading the Ultimate Spider-Man, the first one with Bagley and Bendis, except instead of them dealing with kid problems and I'm going to school no, this is I'm a 30-year-old adult with 2 kids and a job, and like it's just it just hit home differently.
Yeah.
And it was a nice ode to say like, no, here's that thing that you always thought should happen, and it's happening. Mm-hmm. They're married, they've got kids, they're happy together. I'm sure they're going to ruin it.
You never know.
You never know. But it's just been good. It's been great that way. Mm-hmm. The overarching world of the Ultimate Universe hasn't really poured in yet.
Yep.
Which I'm glad, because I'm not sure how it's going to fit. But just the differences in what he's spun out, like his interactions with the Shocker in the first couple issues, where it's just like he just keeps getting once over by this guy because he just doesn't know any better. It was humorous, and especially from the Shocker. like we're not talking about some powerful villain. It's like the Shocker.
Yeah.
It's just been absolutely terrific. Even the issues that I know a lot of people complain about because they want to buy their issue, they want to see fight Spider-Man, this, that, and the other, and it'll just be, Ben and J. Jonah Jameson all issue, because they're telling a story.
Yep.
Right, and even though I don't always think Hickman is the best in-depth, gritty, like really getting down in there writer, I'm glad that they're doing that, because it's just telling such a better story, much like they did in the Ultimate Spider-Man, where there would be issues upon issues where like Spider-Man, like other than maybe swinging from one place to another, really didn't have an impact. It was more about his life, about the people around him, and that makes it more intriguing. And that's what I've really loved about this, is just like, what if Spider-Man didn't get his powers till he was 30 and married?
Exactly.
It's great. I very much enjoyed it.
No, I agree. I think the only reason it's not on my list is because I'm reading it on Marvel Unlimited. It's like 3 months delayed compared to live type of thing, and I think it just hasn't gotten to that point yet where I'm like, okay, because like where I'm at Marvel Unlimited is like they just introduced Sinister Six, and so far it's really good, but it's been a bit slow. I'm kind of waiting for that next hit the next gear of, okay, let's actually fight some villains, let's actually get into the nitty gritty of it and see how it goes. My favorite part about Ultimate Spider-Man is so far Harry Osborn. I love the idea of, one, they're not friends from childhood, they just meet as adults. You have 2 adults that one gets powers, the other one gets a power suit, and it's the idea of, like, hey, how are you doing it? Oh, I'm doing it this way. Oh, you didn't talk to your wife about this? You're crazy. Like those conversations.
Just real conversations that would probably come up, where it's just like, no, I've got to protect them, and they're like, what? Like, this is the biggest thing that's happened to you. How did you not talk to your wife?
How you not talk to your wife? And of course you always have that underlying thing of it's an Osborn. You never know when he's going to turn on you.
Well, and you got Otto Octavius tech nerd on the side, and you just know something's going to go wrong there at some point. So I'm very much enjoying it. I'm looking forward to where it's going. It's like deviated enough to really call it its own thing. Yep. Whereas I found the Ultimate Spider-Man, like after a while, even though some of the characters were changed, it was just like, oh, let's introduce Octopus and let's introduce Kraven, and let's like it just became like the other comic book, just not quite the same. Just was, a little more updated.
A little more updated, right? Yeah. But no, I'm really enjoying Ultimate Spider-Man as well. Like I said, it's just kind of, and again, the artwork's amazing. Checchetto does a great job.
So good.
And then I'm just, and I love Mary Jane. I love all the side characters. His children.
The beard on Peter.
Yeah, it looks great, it looks right? Good. Man, I'm digging it. So I highly recommend it as well. But yeah, my number one though. Which we didn't have any crossovers between our. No. I almost had Transformers, but I pushed it off.
Immortal Thor.
I almost put that one too for sure. But yeah, my number one. I read this early in the year, and it just stuck with me all year. I was like, this is actually a pretty good book. It wasn't like heads and tails above everything else, but it was a really solid read, which was Moon Knight. By Jed MacKay and Alessandro Cappuccio, which started back in 2021, and I would say definitely from 2021 up until Blood Hunt, it was really good. And since Blood Hunt, because again, Blood Hunt kind of muddled everything, it's a little bit messy, but up until then it was really good. And I think what the reasons I really liked it was it's very reminiscent of Chip Zdarsky's run on Daredevil, where he takes a character and just really delves into again his past. His side characters and really modernizes it and discusses them while also bringing everything into a modern point and expanding on the character, right? Like it really and the other interesting part is that throughout the entire series he's talking to a therapist. And so obviously if you know Moon Knight, he's crazy. So it's really delving into his pathos as a hero, and what he's trying to do now is way more neighborhood focused, which I know Moon Knight's always flirted with, but then sometimes he's an Avenger, sometimes he's all over the place, right? But this again, it kind of narrows him down just a neighborhood, just protect this one neighborhood. But he's still crazy, but he's still aggressive. People are going holy shit, it's the Moon Knight, we gotta get the hell out of here. But he still is willing to help people and really try his best to help people. So I think it's a really interesting character study on Moon Knight. And again, and then it starts expanding his cast. It introduces Hunter's Moon, which again is a really interesting thing. It introduces, I can't remember their names, but he gets 2 vampire sidekicks, which is fascinating because they also introduce the fact that Moon Knight hates vampires. The whole, apparently, the moon god hates vampires suddenly, but it ends up being very interesting. But and it's all about him dealing with the fact that Khonshu wants him to do one thing, but he wants to do another thing. The other interesting thing is this is post Fist of Khonshu, or War of Khonshu, whatever it was called, right? So when he almost killed the Avengers, so the Avengers are like, what the fuck's wrong with me? So again, it's really interesting to be like, what does it mean to be a hero after you almost destroyed the world, type of thing. So yeah, it was just really good character arcs, really good artwork. The artwork's really nice, and then it really just fleshes out the character. And I've never really been a Moon Knight guy. It's always one of those things of he looks really cool, and I really like the TV show, but I was never really into Moon Knight, so it was really interesting learning more about his history and modernizing it. The only issue I have with it is it doesn't you don't see the alternate personalities that often.
Right.
There's one arc where he has to kind of grab them and be like, hey, I need your help, and then that's very interesting because they're like, oh, why the fuck should we help you, type of thing. So it's a conversation between that, but other than that, they're kind of in the background, and it's mainly just focused on Mark Spector Moon Knight type of thing. Right. But it's a really good read. I highly recommend.
It's one that I've heard and seen a lot of reviews on, people commending him for the work that he did on it. And then the worry then when he got into Avengers and he was writing 3 or 4 different comics, I was like, are you going to spread yourself too thin? But that's what from what I understand, that's what got him acclaimed and noticed. So it's something that I'll probably go back and read at some point.
Yeah, highly recommend. It was really good. So, and like I said, the artwork is really good. So really good read. But yeah, those were our tops of the years, Dave. I think it was a really
year's over.
We're years over, which is crazy. Did you have any other comics, quick shout outs for any other comics you thought?
I was really thinking about the comics that I was that I read on a regular, as far as standing series and whatnot, and just what was there and what didn't quite get there for me. And I really like what, despite other people's obvious opinions, I really like what Jed McKay's done on Avengers so far.
Okay.
I've enjoyed it. I just feel like the story got kind of hijacked twice by Fall of X and then Blood Hunt. But I liked the Impossible City arc, introducing these new, are they villains? Sort of. Again, this is where I hate the fact that Feige and Marvel are trying to link everything together so much, is because they came in hard with Kang, and I was like, yes. And then they were like, oh, we had to fire the guy that plays Kang, so yeah, Kang's just been sidelined. And so they just kicked him on, and I was like, well, like, just because the actor's gone doesn't mean that no, because the reason why they can't do that is because now it's Doom. So now they're going to move on to Doom, and that's where I think, the people that do like Invincible, the people that get to write Saga and stuff like this, don't have to worry about this idiocy of these guys going like, oh, well, it doesn't match up and it's not pushing the direction we want it to push, so it's just gonna go away. Bye-bye. Like, I was so looking forward to Kang being involved, to some extent, regardless of whether Jonathan Majors or whether he was in the MCU or not.
Yeah. So
that was another thing that I felt, probably had some kind of an effect on, what he was writing and where he was going with it.
Yeah.
But it just hadn't had enough legs to get there. But I've liked the art. I loved the issues with from Squadron Supreme. Hyperion, yeah. Where his world is shattered, because they like, I remember reading that series that they referenced, which was Avengers. It was like not Beyond. I'm drawing a blank on what it was called, but it was Reborn.
Okay.
And it was like this whole other world where the Squadron Supreme were the Avengers, basically, right? And the Avengers were all just like a bunch of losers that never got their powers or were doing other things. And then when that world got shattered, because it was Mephisto that had created it, it left Hyperion with this like, now I'm nothing.
Yeah.
So he just flies out to, I can't remember where it was, like Uranus or something, and then he threatens Earth, and he's like, oh, by the way, I'm flying as fast as I can at Earth.
Oh, jeez.
And I'm going to hit it, and it's going to kill a lot of people.
Yeah.
And he just starts going, and it's like how the Avengers are like, okay, how are we going to solve this? How are we going to stop him? Like, he's had some really good notes. The only thing I question with Jed McKay as well is just like, where is this going to all connect and be a bigger story? Like, it's either going to end up being like, oh, okay, you just wrote a whole other story over here, so this stuff didn't matter, which is okay. Or it's going to be like, oh my God, you're super genius, because these, like, here's how all these things connect.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it comes. But I really enjoyed that one. I really enjoy the Uncanny X-Men, as we were discussing just before. I think the art's great. I thought the first issue, there was like 4 or 5 different like hooks on stuff like, okay, what what is all this stuff? I'm just curious to see. Like, it was only had at the time, I think, 3 or 4 issues out. So again, just not enough to kind of get going on. And the last one I would say would be Daredevil. It was interesting because I felt Chip Zdarsky left it in a spot where it was just like, how the hell do you move forward from this? Like, what the hell? He fought the devil and all this stuff. And I think they've done as much as they could with it coming out of it. They had decent art. The story's been okay. It's just, the only reason I didn't put it on there is because I'm just like, I'm kind of sick of this whole religious aspect being like the dominance of like, this has been going on for a while now. Like, can we just move on to some other kind of storyline? Is the only thing. But the art and the writing's been decent. Again, just didn't have either enough legs, or in this case, it was just like, it just wasn't quite enough to. It's a comic that I look forward to reading every month. The art's been good, the writing's good, just wasn't quite there.
Yeah. My quick shout outs. Something is Killing the Children, still really good. The only reason it didn't make my list is because it felt like a very similar storyline to the original arc. So I'm like, kind of not a little bit repetitive. It obviously expanded the universe, but again, Some Killing the Children, amazing. Quick shout out to Wonder Woman Historia. I thought it was really good. It reminded me a lot of Neil Gaiman's Sandman, like very that type of thing, but all about Wonder Woman. So it was really, or at least Wonder Woman's the history of the Amazon. So really interesting read. But the one I also want to shout out was She-Hulk by Rainbow Rowell, only because, in my opinion, that's what the TV show should have been.
Yeah.
Like, the biggest issue with the TV show is it couldn't really decide. It was like trying to make fun of superhero TV shows while also being a superhero TV show. Whereas She-Hulk by Rainbow Rowell was really just about her personal life. And just like, oh, my boyfriend, I can't decide, he's being difficult, and like, I want to be good friends, but I'm also a lawyer, and like, basically, like, if the show had been about that, it would have been way better.
Well, that's what brings people in. Is like when you can connect to them, on a personal level of like things they're going through. But I don't know why so many writers like they've taken deviation from that and going like, we don't want to learn about that. We want to do more superhero stuff, and it's like, but like superhero stuff's fun. But it's the complication of these people having like real lives that make it interesting.
Well, I think the problem is, again, because they don't know how long they're going to be on a series, right? Yeah. Like, I think, again, when you have Invincible, when you have Sega, you have these people who are able to, or even back in the day, I mean, Chris Claremont was on X-Men for what, like 20 years?
Yeah,
like, he was, exactly. Like, I think if they actually gave writers, and even Jed McKay on Moon Knight still going, it's been 3 or 4 years now, I think if you give a writer enough time to really flesh out their entire life, it builds onto that character. So, but the biggest issue with She-Hulk is the action. Whenever she did try to do action, was terrible. Yeah. So that's one of those, like, that's the catch-22 of Rainbow Rowell writing comic books. But it was actually really good.
I do have a cheater one.
Okay, what's a cheater?
My cheater is I watched X-Men 97 with subtitles.
Hey!
So I had to read it.
You kind of read. What'd you think of it? What'd you think of
it? Because my wife was watching it with me. Again, very much enjoyed it. It harkened back to a whole bunch of stories from like future and past and all kinds of stuff. It was a lot of fun. The only parts I disliked were just because I think she's the most useless superhero ever was Jubilee and her little friggin'
which they definitely toned her down in 97.
Yeah, but everybody else, like, I just kept looking. It was like, oh man, I hope they bring in Colossus, or they, Nightcrawler. Oh, they brought in Nightcrawler. Yeah. Like they just kept feeding in guys, occasionally, or they'd show them in the background doing stuff when they were in Genosha.
Yeah,
it was really well done.
I gotta admit, 2024 may be the year of Cyclops redemption for me.
Yeah.
Because X-Men 97, he was amazing. Mm-hmm. And then in X-Men by Jed McKay, he's been pretty good so far. So maybe this is the year Cyclops returns for Greg, but we'll see. But 2024, we have no idea what's going to happen in 2025. Thank you so much for joining us. Go ahead.
Is there anything you're looking for?
Oh, okay. I'm really looking forward to, you just mentioned it, X-Men by Jed McKay. It just started, so I'm like, okay, where's it going? And then Exceptional X-Men by E-Viewing.
Yeah.
I've only gotten like 1 issue in, so I'm very excited.
2.
Yeah, so I'm very curious to see where it's going. I'm very excited for it. But so far, it's been really good.
Yeah.
What's you?
For myself, just because I've bought them and I've got to get them at some point, I'm looking forward to reading Spawn.
Oh, nice. I've
got 4 compendiums to read.
Nice. Okay, let me know how it is. I'm curious.
Lots to read.
Yeah.
So there's Spawn, Invincible.
Yep.
I've got the first compendium for that. Looking forward to reading some more Batman graphic novels because I've got some more of those. I'm halfway through the second White Knight, the White Knight Beyond, and then followed by the Curse of the White Knight. So I'm looking forward to seeing that one.
I thought Beyond was the third one.
Beyond might have been the third one, whichever order they go in.
Yeah.
But I'm just looking forward to it because the first one was so good.
It's so good.
It was so good.
And the second one's really good too. I did read the second one. It's really
good. Looking forward to that. And then I'm just looking forward to, like you, I'm looking forward to some of these other comic book series that just didn't have enough legs because they've only been out for 4 or 5 issues or whatever, just to see where they take us going into 2025.
Yeah, for sure. So those were our favorite comics of 2024. Let us know in the comments what your favorite comics of 2024 were, or what you thought about our list. Make sure to follow us wherever you found us, and we will see you in the new year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.